Hi everybody, welcome to this last tutorial. So what we're going to be doing in this tutorial is, well, first of all, it's not really a tutorial as such, because I did the full tutorial for the scene I'm about to show you, and it came to about 40 minutes, and I thought, well, I'm going to want to go through the whole of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you some basics of how I approach the scene. And then I'm just going to sort of talk you through it just quickly. So not like a follow along, and then you can kind of play around with it, because what I want you to do more than anything is actually, start playing with these kind of the cameras and what have you inside the 3D space in After Effects. So without further ado then, the purpose of this tutorial is to try to encourage you to see the 3D camera and the 3D space basically within After Effects, not just in terms of sort of like a normal camera size, but actually, you can kind of have it at any scale. So obviously we've looked at the logo so far, which is kind of macro, it feels kind of small. So what we're going to be doing now is creating something much, much bigger in terms of scope and scale. So this is the scene that I've made with some planets. I made these planets from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'll post another tutorial showing you how I did that in case you want to make your own at some point. But what I've also done is I've given you some planet assets in this After Effects tutorial. So we've got ringed planet here, which I think that needs a bit of work, to be honest. The ring isn't really doing it for me, but anyway, I've got a stormy planet over here, basic planet, just a sort of purple rock texture, and then a big sun with a nice sort of corona and everything else. Okay, so these are the four objects that you can be playing with today, and what you need to be doing is just setting up a camera and just having a play really, and just sort of seeing what happens when you think about this camera not as being, the size of a normal camera looking at a small logo, but actually looking at, the size of something that can peer around the side of a planet. You know what I mean? Because obviously that's the kind of scale you can also get in After Effects. So let's make a start, and I'll just show you some of the sort of basics of what I did. So I'm going to go with just the basic planet. So I'm going to get rid of the ringed planet and the stormy planet. I should add, when you're working in this, you probably want to turn your resolution to half, just to allow it to progress better, because otherwise, you're going to be working with quite high res stuff here. So like, for example, this background here, is in, if you look at it, it's in 1920 by 1080, which is the same as our composition 1920 by 1080 standard HD, but of course if you put it to half, then it takes that resolution down. It's less about the background, obviously, more about the kind of planets, because they were made in 4K. But anyway, you'll see what I mean. So yeah, if you go into full, just to sort of check things like focus and bits and bobs, and then just like put it into half or even third when you're working through it. Okay, so anyway, a couple of quick elementals before we, just to sort of talk you through it. So we've taken away the ringed planet, and the stormy planet, that's going to go as well. Okay, so here's our basic planet and here's our sun. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create layer and new camera. Okay, just like we've been doing, I'm going to go with a 50mm camera, because I know that's the kind of look that I want. And I'm going to turn on my second view, which is my custom view over here. And of course, at the moment, the camera can't see anything because none of these are 3D objects. So if you toggle through until you can see the 3D cube, and turn on basic planet and turn on the sun. Okay, and now they can be seen by the camera. So here's the thing, right? If I go to basic planet, if I pull that towards the camera like so, and maybe move it in a bit, like that. Okay. Like so, there. Okay, so here's the thing. If we move the camera now, let's get our camera, let's open that up, and let's go into transform. And if we move this camera from side to side, look, it kind of works, but the objects do look a bit like two-dimensional objects, and they're kind of, what I'm trying to get at really is if I click on the sun, for example, and I rotate it like this, look, it's literally just a flat object, and it's actually two-dimensional because I can get it to a point where it just disappears, like so. Okay, so what we're going to do is we need, first of all, for these planets to always look 3D, and so what we're going to do is we're going to right click on our planets, and we're going to go to transform and auto orient. Okay, and then we're going to click orient towards camera, and we're going to do the same with our basic planet. Right click, transform, auto orient, orient towards camera. Okay, you might have seen them do a little wiggle there as they kind of like went, okay, now I'm oriented towards the camera. So now whatever I do with my camera, if I don't know, if I move my camera in a bit, let's say, for example, and now if I move my camera to the side, whatever happens, can you see on this shot here, if I zoom in a little bit, as I move the camera from side to side, can you see the sun is rotating so that the camera always sees it as a flat plane? And what that then means is that then with the CC sphere effect, which is what I've used to create these planets, I can then go into like basic planet, for example, and I can then go into the effect controls for CC sphere, and I don't know why that's done that, but I can actually rotate. Oh, sorry, that's radius, that's making it bigger. I can actually, where's my rotation? There we go. I can actually rotate my planet like so, you see? Now, what you've got to be careful of when you do this is that you will find it's harder to see on this one because of the illumination. Let me try and just brighten it up for you so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go, so we bang on. Can you see there's a line there? So as the effect is sort of wrapped around this sphere, it's created a line, and actually it also works as well. You've got these polar coordinates issues as well, which obviously don't look quite right. So what you've got to try and do is just make sure that as you rotate your sphere, that you don't see any of those issues. Okay. Now, of course, you can turn it on its axis if you want it to spin in a different way, like so. You can turn it on its axis like that, and then you could have it spinning like that, you know, whatever. And just play around with it until you don't get the issues anymore, like so, or something like that. Okay, but yeah, I mean, the idea is really that you can kind of play with it, so you can have it spinning in any direction that you want, but it will always orient towards the camera as long as you've got that selected, and just make sure you don't have those kind of those lines that give the lie to what you've made. Okay, so that's the sort of the elementary sort of aspect of what I've done. So let me open recent VFX planets, don't save those changes. So this is the composition then that I've created. So let me just quickly talk you through this, what I've done. Okay, so as you can see, it's a sort of basic, the camera's just tracking to the side. So what I've done is I've added some camera movement. If I open up camera 1, you can see that I've altered my position. And my orientation, I also had that stopwatch on as well in case I wanted to reorient the camera. In the end, I didn't. And what I did, of course, with the position is I chose to move it from so that we get this nice track to the side, okay, like so. And then what I did was I right-click on position and then keyframe assistant and easy ease, and so what's happened there is that my keyframes have gone from being these diamond shapes to these triangles. And so if we now click on position and turn on the graph, the speed graph, we can see what I've done. I've done the speed for this just the same way as we've used the speed graph before. So instead of having a nice sort of continuous curve, which sort of would have started off slow, sped up and slowed down again, I've chosen this sort of more slightly more interesting, go a bit faster and then slow down as you get as you sort of start moving around the planet. Okay, so there we go. So that's the camera movement. The other thing I did was I adjusted the focus distance to create that nice like focus swim at the beginning, which I think kind of works quite nicely, particularly in relation to the lens flare that we've got here. Okay, so that's that. I'll talk about the lens flares in a minute. So there's my basic planet. Now, the other thing that I've done, I did the background here, obviously, and that background, I just desaturated that. So if I just solo that, you can see that it's quite a different look to the actual background, which is obviously much brighter. That's a much brighter look. This is just an image I found off the internet. But on the composition, so this little dot here, this is solo, so just run that channel basically. Just saves you turning off all the eyes so you can see it. So yeah, so I just sort of desaturated that just to create that look. Okay, so it just gives a bit of texture in the background. And so it just sort of, it's not really particularly, you don't really see much of it, but that's the point with these things. It's, subtle is always best, I think. Then the sun doesn't really do anything. The sun's just there. and gradually I obviously focus on the sun. There's some evolution going on with the sun, we don't really see it. That's actually in the comp. So you'll notice that these planets, as I say, I'll talk about this in another tutorial, how I actually made the planets, but each of the planets is a pre-composition. So if I open up the sun, you'll see that there's the sun with its corona around and everything, and it's got some evolution options going on. So as I move that through, you can see it's changing like so. Okay, and that's actually made up of several layers, and then also another pre-comp, which is this texture map that I created, which then I wrapped into the sphere, like so. Anyway, so that's that. If I go back into comp 1, the purple planet was exactly the same. And the last thing that I did, you'll see this purple disc here. What I also wanted to do is just create this idea of the light kind of kissing the edge of the planet as the camera comes around it. Okay, so what I did with that was I created 2 solids and made them circles using the ellipse tool. So you create a layer, new solid of a particular color, whatever you want. So that sort of pinky kind of color, whatever, like so, like that. There's my solid. I can put it up here if I want to. Then with my ellipse tool, holding down the shift key, I then drew a perfect circle like that. And then what I did was I made that into a 3D object. Moved that in space so that it lined up with the back of the planet, and then I added, if you have a look, so there's the light kiss and the light haze, and in both I added effect controls, curves adjustment, as you can see, and then also a blur. So the blur for the light kiss was only 2 pixels, so it was just a kind of like a really thin rim of light coming around the edge of the planet, whereas the light haze was 21, so that was sort of bigger. And the idea behind the light haze is that one comes in a bit later on as the project progresses. You can see that one sort of building as the scene develops, because obviously we're seeing more of the sun, we're seeing more of this thing. And all I did was I literally just did that with movement keyframes, you know. So yeah, so that's pretty much it really. You know, in terms of what I did, those are the basics. The key thing to remember is that auto orient towards camera. So right click on your 3D object, for example, transform, auto orient, and then make sure that's orient towards camera. And once you've got that, then wherever you put your camera, it will always turn towards it, and consequently it will always look like a 3D object. Cool. So I think the key then is, as I say, if you just have a bit of fun with playing with these objects. Oh yeah, and I didn't talk about the lens flare, did I? Sorry. So lens flares, as you know, I don't try to use any plugins or any extra kind of third-party bits that you wouldn't perhaps have access to. The lens flares in After Effects, quite honestly, aren't very good. There are much better ones out there. So I've got a whole range of cool stuff from videocopilot.net with this extraordinary lens flare plugin, this lens flare generator. And if anybody ever is needing to use really cool lens flares, and just let me know and we'll see if we can get it installed on a computer that you're working on, because it really is a much more sophisticated tool than the one inside After Effects. But because we haven't got that one today, and you might not want to have that one at home or anything like it, I've just gone with the lens flare that is installed within After Effects. And the way you do it is you go to Layer and New Solid, and I'm going to create a black solid like so. And then what you do is on that you just go to Effect and Generate and Lens Flare. There we go. And there's our flare. So as you can see, it's not a particularly sophisticated flare. My favorite of the three, if we click on our black solid, here's our lens flare effect. My favorite of the three is the 105mm prime. And what you can do is you can just move the center of your flare around inside the clip. So what you then do is, once I've got my flare on, I can then select my transfer mode. Remember, if you can't see that, you toggle switches to see your transfer mode, and then you select that to screen, and then you can see the composition underneath it. So what I've done is I've just set the center of my flare where I want it. Okay, you can also change the sort of the center of your the thing that it pivots around as well, the point that it pivots around, to create different kind of flare effects and bits and pieces. And what I've chosen to do is I've chosen to create two flares, one which is an overlay one which is just a standard screen. And in the overlay, I've also used a mask, and I've just sort of masked out the this bit, because I find this part of the flare a little bit kind of less sophisticated than the bright bit. So I've masked that out. So in Flare 2, if I open that up, there's a mask, and I've just inverted that, so the mask is actually cutting out what it's surrounding rather than cutting out what's around it. Feather in the edge, and that then means that basically this part of the flare is 2 layers, and that part of the flare is only 1, which is why it's more sort of subtle. Okay. So anyway, so that's my my project. So yeah, so you can see that's what I ended up trying to do, and then this is the final render. So you can kind of see it in full res. There you go. So I'll upload that to Moodle as well, just so you can see it. But yeah, have a go at playing around with these planets and stuff, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Nice one.